Tonight we're going to start our discussion of the traditions. Suppose I were to appear here before you and grab the mic and look down on all of you and say, my name is Jim, and I am the new South Florida czar of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was just appointed by Bill Wilson III, President for life. Now I have brought with me some members of our AA committee which examines the bona fides of all those who claim to be members. We're going to set up as a first duty, we're going to set up an admissions committee. And we're going to put together a list of those things which a new aspiring member of this fellowship must have. Because without those, we won't be able to admit them to membership. Of course, we will accept your recommendations, but the final decision will be mine. As czar of all of this, I have the final say in everything. I know you agree with that because you're all sick, sore, and wounded people who need to be directed and controlled in order to feel comfortable and secure. I don't see anyone who is objecting to this, and of course you ought not to. Now, first of all, it's important that we're not going to accept anyone as members who doesn't have at least a halfway decent financial statement. We're not going to take anybody who just wanders in off the streets. They can go find a treatment center or something, one of those detox things. We don't want them in AA. This is a fellowship for people who have arrived. We're going to keep it pure. As a matter of fact, we'll probably have set up some additional requirements for membership. Anything goes, of course, as long as I say it's all right. You can disband all of your committees. Forget about this business of group conscience. That doesn't work anyway. Nothing but a popularity contest. Now, if I were to come in here and begin to take this approach, what do you suppose would happen? Aside from the fact that I would probably be lynched. I'd be alone in a New York second, wouldn't I? That little charade was just to illustrate what AA is not. The traditions are spiritual principles. It's very difficult for us to keep this in mind sometimes because we would like to think of spiritual principles in some other light. But the truth of the matter is that the traditions are those principles by which our fellowship and our groups function. But, and here's the beautiful thing about it, these traditions are equally applicable to us in our daily lives, in our own spiritual lives. The things that we do as an individual will be in direct parallel with these traditions which we must observe in our group function. In the beginning, there were traditions right away. Remember in the foreword to the first edition? Here's what it said. Bottom of page 13, XIII. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's kind of interesting too, because you see, nowhere in the big book, nor in the traditions, does it mention that we are to announce ourselves every time we speak as an alcoholic. This is something which has grown up as a matter of custom. What we have instead is a requirement that in public or in any of the public media we announce ourselves by our first name only and as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very earnestly we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. Now here's some more traditions. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. So you can see the beginnings of the traditions right here in 1939 when this foreword was first written. As I mentioned in the earlier meeting, the preamble, or the definition that we read at meetings, which was the application of the grapevine for special status with the Post Office Department, contains much of the language which will lead us directly to the traditions. And so by 1944, a lot of this has already been put forward. In the beginnings of 1945, Bill was asked by several of the older members if he would be willing to gather together and write out the traditions, that is, the spiritual bywords which the fellowship should live by. And he was more than happy to do that. He already had, of course, much to go on, because traditions are, as the word implies, these are things which have built up. They've come to be accepted traditionally. And this is not a set of rules that anybody just sat down one day and concocted. And when Bill wrote them out, he wasn't doing anything much more than being a scrivener. What he was really doing was memorializing, as he did the steps, that which had been word of mouth up to that point. But there was a lot in the background, especially there was a group in 1830 or 35, somewhere in there, who called themselves the Washingtonians. And they were around for 6 years, and a lot of people got sober with them. And they did very well so long as they stayed with a spiritual program, and as long as they stayed with the ideas that they started out with, they did pretty well. They had over 100,000 members in 6 years. Then they made some fundamental errors. For example, the 6 guys who had founded the Washingtonians were out there busy speaking from every stump they could find in churches and in schools and in political rallies, announcing themselves by their full names and taking full credit for the sobriety of the members of the Washingtonian Society. In other words, these 6 people, these 6 men, were on a major power trip. And then they made the fatal errors which led to the demise of the Washingtonians. They first tied in with the abolitionists. This was a group of people, a political party, which was dedicated to the proposition of abolishing slavery. And the Washingtonians became a part of that movement. And even more critically, they became a part of the Prohibitionist Party. They took up the cudgel for prohibition, for what would later, many, many years later, would be passed into a constitutional amendment. But in the days that they did this, they violated what we now know to be primary traditions and principles that we have to follow, not to ever allow our society to be entangled with any other causes, with any other parties, especially not with politics. And so the Washingtonians collapsed. They fell on their sword. And so in 1945, Bill started writing. And he wrote what has turned out to be, and we see it in the back of our big book, the so-called long form of the traditions. And he began to push these. And they were published. He published a whole series of articles in the Grapevine about the traditions. If you have the Language of the Heart, which I thoroughly recommend to you as an extremely important book. Language of the Heart is a publication which is conference approved. It is a compilation of all of the articles that Bill Wilson wrote for the Grapevine from 1944, when it was founded, up to the time of his death at the end of 1969, early 1970. And within that volume are some of the things that you won't find anywhere else in the literature. Some of the most important writing that Bill ever did is in that book. And the first section of that book is devoted not entirely, but almost entirely to the traditions and the development of the traditions. And Bill wrote extensively about each of the traditions. And so if you want to learn about the traditions, get Language of the Heart. What we find in the 12 and 12 is a later compilation, 10 years later, where Bill took what he had written earlier and kind of condensed it. You'll find the full exposition, and the beauty of the traditions is laid out for us in the Language of the Heart. Now what happened was that for the next 4 years, in fact the first publication of the traditions in the long form wasn't until 1946. In the next 4 years, Bill pushed in every way he could for the adoption of the traditions. It got to a point, he reports, that he would be invited to come to, say, St. Louis to speak. And the speaker seeker would say, Bill, we want you to come and speak, but don't say anything about those damn traditions. We're tired of hearing about them. He said, that's all you can talk about these days. Well, it paid off. Because at the first international in 1950, what has now become known as the short form of the traditions was adopted by the International, and they became the standardized rules by which we live. Now, when I say rules, I'm just using that in a generic sense, because the traditions are not rules in the sense that we normally think of rules. We are free to break each and every one of them if we wish. The traditions are based upon some very simple concepts. And I suppose the most important concept is that we don't have to be afraid. The traditions demonstrate an absence of fear in the conducting of our business as a fellowship and as a group. We do not have to exclude anyone. We do not have to monitor anyone. Anyone who says they are a member is a member. We cannot put them out. We cannot discipline them. We have absolutely no control over the membership or who is a member. And this is utterly unique. When we start to think about these traditions and the way the fellowship is set up, it blows our minds, because it doesn't conform to anything at all like what we find in other organizations. You go to any group, any club, go to the Elks or the Rotarians, or join a political party, or do anything where people gather together, go to the boardroom of any corporation, and you're going to find that they are organized along strict lines, that there is a hierarchy, that there are people who are in charge, and the people who are not in charge have to kowtow to those who are in charge, that there are rules and regulations. If you break them, you're out, or you're punished, you're penalized. We have no written constitution. We have no bylaws. We have no charters. When this group applied to New York to be registered, that's all that happened. Our name was registered. Nobody sent us a questionnaire to decide whether we were properly organized or not. They couldn't. There is no such thing here. I remember the first day I went to a meeting, and after an hour and a half of this meeting, I was convinced that there wasn't anybody in charge. And I figured out that within 6 months I could be president of the whole chicken outfit. Because it was a total power vacuum. Nobody was running this thing. It seemed, you know what Clarence Snyder used to call AA? He said, unity in AA is chaos. It is anarchy. He said, if you don't like what's going on in the group, you grab a coffee pot, your big book, and somebody who thinks like you do, you go start your own meeting. And when he said that, there were probably 15,000 groups. Now there are probably close to 110,000 groups, growing exponentially. One of the ways that AA grows is that we become disillusioned or dissatisfied with what's going on in the group that we're attending, and we go start our own. Now this group started because there was a hole on Saturday nights that needed filling. It was a void. And it's proven to be absolutely right that this meeting was needed. We started out with 10 or 12 people, and we've had as many as 180 people here for a meeting on a Saturday night at 7:30. It's absolutely incredible. That's why I call it the miracle on Dixie. There was a need for this meeting, and it's proven to be so. Also, there's a need for this meeting because in this meeting we talk about spiritual matters. We talk about the steps. We talk about the big book. And we speak the truth to each other. And there's a great need for that too. You know what? People thirst for knowledge. People in AA are thirsting for knowledge. They're thirsting for the truth. And sometimes they feel totally stuck in their meeting life because nothing much is happening. So we get to offer alternatives to that. We get to go into our meetings during the week and share from the big book and share the truth and share what we've learned and share about the steps and talk about God and talk about spiritual recovery. And when we do that, it begins to spread out. Now here's what's happened. Because we have these traditions and because for almost universally we voluntarily live by these traditions, we have a fellowship which has increased in membership from something less than 200,000 when I came in to way up in the millions today. And it doesn't show any sign of weakening at all. It keeps on getting stronger. So what we have here is something unique in all of human existence. An organization founded upon the idea of being totally controlled by the will of a loving God as expressed through group conscience. And no other human organization does this. And you'd think this wouldn't work. You mean to tell me there's nobody's in charge, nobody's running this thing? I was a delegate in New York. I'm telling you, that's the most useless bunch of people in the world. I spent 2 years up there and we debated everything in the world, but we didn't have any power to do anything. Which is okay, it was a lot of fun. We made a lot of suggestions and so forth, but the groups don't have to pay attention to those if they don't want to. What's happened here is something utterly unique. We have what I think of as like a gigantic still pond. And when we get to throw a little pebble in that pond, the ripples have the potential to go on forever, because nothing will ever tear our fellowship apart so long as we continue to abide by these spiritual principles we call the traditions. You see, we have made ourselves invulnerable to the vicissitudes of society or life or human nature or anything. We will continue to survive because our trust is in God's will as revealed through our group conscience. And and this is an idea, a philosophy, a work of inspired genius, these traditions. Now, when we think about the first tradition, that our common welfare should come first, that personal recovery depends upon AA unity, we must think in terms of the first tradition and the 12th tradition, because the first tradition and the 12th tradition bookend the other 10. Here we're talking about something of enormous importance, that the common welfare, in other words, that the fellowship must come first in our thinking and in our actions. We think first about the welfare of each of us as we are joined together in groups and in the society as a whole. Because our personal recovery depends upon the continued unity of AA. Now, part of what this means is that we're going to sublimate, for the good of the fellowship and for the good of our own recovery, we're going to sublimate all of our needs, wants, and desires for acclaim, for notoriety, for being the best, for applause, for gaining anything along the lines of advancement. The best thing that's going to happen to us is that we get called upon more and more and more to be of service. Instead of having 4 or 5 people we sponsor, we got 50. Instead of leading 1 meeting a month, we lead 6 or 7. And we do this because as we gain in spiritual strength and in knowledge, we have more and more and more to give. Now, the fellowship itself is impervious to what's going on around it, because it has and relies upon God's strength. Think about that for a second. This is precisely what we do in our own lives, isn't it? Exactly. What we have done to recover is to go to God and say, God, here I am, use me. I give up. Unconditional surrender. I surrender to your will, God. In the 3rd step prayer, what do we ask for? Take my life and my will into your hands, God, and do with it as you will. And whatever it is, I will be there and I will follow your will and I will be obedient. And when we do that, everything changes. Our fellowship depends upon precisely the same surrender. And in the 12th step, 12th tradition, we seriously misstate that so much in our groups, because people haven't read the traditions or haven't bothered to find out what they mean. This business of anonymity has nothing whatsoever to do with the fear of being found out. There's no fear in these traditions at all. They go on the assumption that we don't have to be afraid. If God is with this fellowship, of what do we have to be afraid? And nobody can seriously disrupt us, because if they do, they violate their traditions, they violate their own program, and they will be gone. And we don't have to do a thing about it. This is a self-cleaning oven. And we know that. The 12th tradition is the bookend for the first tradition, because it constitutes as its basis the idea of sacrifice, self-sacrifice. What we do is we sacrifice our need and our wants for notoriety and for acclaim to the good of the whole. That's why we don't use our last name. That's why we don't seek to be recognized as some kind of a guru in AA. That's why we stay humble and modest. Because when we do that, it means that our effectiveness as a member of AA and our effectiveness in helping maintain the unity of AA is increased 100-fold. And so now let's see. In the 12 and 12, Bill asked this question. Does this mean that in AA the individual doesn't count for much? Is he to be dominated by his group and swallowed up in it? We certainly answer this question with a loud no. We believe there isn't a fellowship on earth which lavishes more devoted care upon its individual members. Surely there is none which more jealously guards the individual's right to think, talk, and act as he wishes. No AA can compel another to do anything. Nobody can be punished or expelled. The 12 traditions guarantee AA's unity and contain not a single don't. They repeatedly say we ought, but never you must. To many minds, all this liberty for the individual spells sheer anarchy. Every newcomer, every friend who looks at AA for the first time is greatly puzzled. They see liberty verging on license, yet they recognize at once that AA has an irresistible strength of purpose and action. How, they ask, can such a crowd of anarchists function at all? How can they possibly place their common welfare first? What in heaven's name holds them together? Some have described us as being a pure democracy. Others have described us as being a pure anarchy. Some have even described us as being having no rules whatsoever, no caring whatsoever, almost like the extreme of Zen Buddhism. But of course, there's perhaps a little truth in all of that. But you know, if we look at this critically, we see that we are what we are. We don't get pigeonholed anywhere. You cannot take this fellowship and hold it up to compare it with other human endeavors, because we don't compare. There is no way that we can take this fellowship and make it as any kind of an example one way or another, because it's utterly unique. There are some groups around that have bylaws, I don't know, all kinds of stuff. Long published things and books that they carry around it all about all this stuff, and who can be a twisted servant and who can't. And how many, and we get all these damn rules. And people put these rules in there because they're afraid. They're afraid that if they don't do this, that somebody's going to get over on them. That somebody's going to kind of sneak in here and start, let's say, chairing a meeting who really ought not to. Stop and think about it for a second. If I say to you, look, you don't get to chair a meeting until you got 6 months sobriety. I've forgotten something. Over half of the people who helped write the big book didn't have a year's sobriety yet. And many of them didn't have 6 months. And when Bill and Bob sat down with Bill D., Bob had been sober a few days. These kind of artificial things are one that we need to watch out for, because what happens is that sooner or later we begin to feel kind of uneasy because we don't have control here. It's going right back to what we talked about earlier tonight. This lack of power. This feeling that somehow or another we have to gain power. We have to gain control. And instead of being willing to trust that the people who need to be there and who need to speak, who need to lead the meetings will appear, and they will, we set up all these artificial rules. Can't be a sponsor till you've got so much time. There are other rules, like you can't have an affair, a relationship for a year. You can't make a major change or a major decision in your life for a year, and on and on and on and on. And all that stuff is pure nonsense, because it doesn't have anything to do with the individual. And any time that whenever we do this, we try to set up some standards and lock people into these standards, we violate these traditions every time we do that. Because we do not have the right to tell anyone else how they are to be. We must trust that if they are doing wrong, they will eventually disappear, and they will. And we don't have to worry about it. And I had a wonderful friend from California AA who was here in Miami for a long time, Sebastian. We called him Father Smurf. And every time Sebastian was called on, he would say this: what AA is all about is mind your own damn business. And then he said, that's enough out of me. I want to read this to you. Those who look closely soon have the key to this strange paradox. The AA member has to conform to the principles of recovery. His life actually depends upon obedience to spiritual principles. Now, this is what we talk about every Saturday in our step meetings. The steps are spiritual principles. And if we don't learn anything else, we must learn that the 12th step is right when it says we practice these principles in all of our affairs, these spiritual principles. If he deviates too far, the penalty is sure and swift. He sickens and dies. At first he goes along because he must, but later he discovers a way of life he really wants to live. Moreover, he finds he cannot keep this priceless gift unless he gives it away. Neither he nor anybody else can survive unless he carries the AA message. See how all of this stuff dovetails directly with the steps and with our personal recovery? And when you study the traditions, remember, and this is what we're going to be doing, as we do this week after week, we're going to see how these traditions apply directly to our personal recovery. The moment this 12-step work forms a group, another discovery is made, that most individuals cannot recover unless there is a group. Realization dawns that he is just a small part of a great whole, that no personal sacrifice is too great for the preservation of the fellowship. He learns that the clamor of desires and ambitions within him must be silenced whenever these could damage the group. You see, this is the principle, again, of self-sacrifice, and it is the basic idea of the 12th tradition, that we sacrifice all of these needs, human wants and needs, for the good of the whole. And it is based upon this that the fellowship survives. Can you imagine if each of us was free to simply follow our own wants, needs, and desires to hell with the group? We would blow apart, and New York second. It becomes plain that the group must survive where the individual will not. So at the outset, how best to live and work together as groups becomes the prime question. In the world about us, we saw personalities destroying whole peoples. The struggle for wealth, power, and prestige was tearing humanity apart as never before. If strong people were stalemated in the search for peace and harmony, what was to become of our erratic band of alcoholics? As we once struggled and prayed for individual recovery, just so earnestly did we commence to quest for the principles through which AA itself might survive. Notice that Bill tells us that these traditions are principles. On the anvils of experience, the structure of our society was hammered out. Thus it has been with AA. By faith and by works, we have been able to build upon the lessons of an incredible experience. These lessons live in the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, which, God willing, shall sustain us in unity for so long as He may need us. This fellowship, if it continues to follow these traditions, will last so long as God needs us. And if that ever should come to a point where we're no longer needed in some future total utopia, then I suppose that would be the end. But right now, we don't see any end to the fellowship. It can go on literally forever. Now, each time that we throw a little pebble into that still pond, the ripples can go on forever. This gives us a little tiny share of immortality that we wouldn't have otherwise. And we gain that because we're in service to God rather than in service to ourselves. You see, that's the whole idea here, isn't it? What the big book tells us is that our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us. And the traditions reinforce this idea in our group action, in our group living. And so we're going to sacrifice for the good of the whole, knowing that the unity of the fellowship is of utter importance, critical importance to our own survival.
Jim, what did you say about the traditions reinforce what?
What?
The traditions reinforce what, did you say?
Spiritual principles.
I don't remember.
Where were you reading from? What page were you reading?
Page 130. I don't remember now. I don't plan any of this, my friend. I don't have any set speech. Anytime you hear me, it's going to be coming from just within me. I always ask God to direct my thoughts and direct my voice, because I found out that if I were to try to compartmentalize this stuff and make speeches out of it, it doesn't come out right, and I don't feel right about it. God directs our thinking and our speaking, and when we go into a meeting, you know, it's a wonderful thing to do. Say, God, please direct my thinking, direct my speech. Let me be of help and service to others. And He does. Okay, my dear friends, that will take care of it for tonight. Next week we'll take a look at the second tradition.